Relations are ways substances are associated to each other. Regularly, they interface distinctive substances, but some of the time they relate in substance with itself. The adicity of a connection alludes to the number of substances it interfaces. The heading of a connection is the range in which substances are related, like 2 is less than 5 versus 5 is more prominent than 2. Both relations and properties portray highlights of reality, but whereas relations include numerous substances, properties have a place to a single entity. There are different sorts of relations talked about in scholarly writing. Inner relations, like likeness, depend exclusively on the properties of the substances included. Indifferentiate, outside relations, like spatial relations, include characteristics past the substances themselves. Formal relations, such as personality, include theoretical concepts, whereas fabric relations, like cherishing, have concrete substance. Coherent relations interface recommendations, while causal relations interface concrete occasions. Relations can too be classified based on their structure, like whether they are symmetric, transitive, or reflexive. Discussions around the nature of relations frequently dig into supernatural questions, such as where relations exist. Eliminativism contends that relations are fair mental develops and not portion of reality. Reductionism claims that relations can be clarified through other substances and aren't a considerable expansion to reality. Realists, on the other hand, accept that relations exist freely of the intellect. Relationalism, a solid shape of authenticity, sets that all of reality is on a very basic level social. Truly, eliminativism and reductionism were the overwhelming seas, but a move toward authenticity happened in the late 19th century due to propels in science, rationale, and science. Definition and key features. A connection is how different substances interface or relate with each other, characterizing them as an entirety. Numerous relations are between particular substances. For illustration, the firstborn kin is more seasoned than their kin. But relations can too be self-referential, like each substance being indistinguishable to itself. Relations can happen between different substances, counting objects, individuals, and concepts. When a connection holds between substances, it constitutes a truth or state of affairs. The term relationship is frequently utilized traded with connection. The substances in a connection are called relata. The word connection comes from Latin terms meaning reference or towardness. In science and rationale, relations are characterized as set theoretic structures. For occasion, the connection less than is the set of all requested sets where the to begin with component is less than the moment, like 2, 3, 4, 5, and 7, 11. Scientific capacities are extraordinary sorts of relations where one component is extraordinarily related with another element. Adicity. The adicity of a connection is the number of substances it includes. It's moreover called arity or degree. For case, the connection, being bigger than, includes 2 substances and has an adicity of 2. This is known as a dyadic or parallel connection. Triadic or ternary relations include 3 substances, like the connection of giving, which incorporates a supplier, a collector, and a blessing. Another case is being between, as in 5 is between 2 and 7, which moreover includes 3 entities. Unigrade relations are relations that have a settled adicity. They continuously apply to the same number of substances. They differentiate with multigrade relations, for which the number of their relata changes from one event to another. It is disputable whether there are veritable multigrade relations. A few scholars, like David M. Armstrong, contend that the adicity of a connection is an fundamental highlight of it. Concurring to this see, there are no multigrade relations on the principal level of reality. However, this see is not for the most part acknowledged and a few cases of multigrade relations have been recommended. Putative illustrations include causal relations, which may relate a few causes to a few effects, logical consequence, which relates several premises to a conclusion they bolster, and expressions like being the tallest among, for which the adicity depends on the measure of the comparison bunch. Multigrade predicates are moreover common in regular dialect. For occasion, the predicate lift is dyadic in the sentence, John is lifting a table, and triadic in the sentence, John and Mary are lifting a table. Other illustrations are predicates that have discretionary contentions, as in the sentences, John is eating a cake, and John is eating. Direction and converse. The heading of a connection is the range in which the components are related to each other. For occasion, if Abelard cherishes Eloise at that point, the connection of adoring goes from Abelard to Eloise. If Eloise cherishes Abelard at that point, the heading goes in the inverse course. Both of these truths have the same constituents. They are as it were recognized by their direction. Only non-symmetric relations have a course, since the arrange of the relata does not make a contrast for symmetric relations. The converse of a non-symmetric connection is a moment connection that continuously goes with the to begin with connection but has a diverse range of components. For illustration, the speak of above is below. This implies that whenever x is above y, then y is below x. The same is the case for relations like coming before and coming after, as well as being a parent of and being a child of. Parallel relations have precisely one talk, whereas tertiary and higher degree relations have a few converses. A connection and its speak carry the same data. For this reason, it is disputable whether they ought to be considered as two unmistakable relations instead of seeing them as one and the same relation. This trouble has incited a few rationalists to conceptualize the directional perspective of non-symmetric relations in an unexpected way, or to deny the presence of Banter relations. Concurring to positionalism, relations do not have a course but have distinctive interesting positions that are filled by their connection. For occurrence, the relation love has two positions, one for the darling and one for the beloved. This clarifies how relata can play diverse parts in a connection without inferring that the connection has a heading or a converse. Contrast to properties. Relations are as a rule differentiated with properties. Properties are held by a single substance and express what this substance is like. Relations interface a few substances and are highlights that apply to them as a whole. A closely related differentiate is that properties have a place to substances or inhere in them, whereas relations are not found in the relata but stand between them. However, there are too numerous parallels between properties and relations, and there is no common ascension on a strict division between the two. Both are regularly utilized to depict and clarify rehashing designs in the world, and numerous of the ontological distinctions connected to properties moreover influence relations. For illustration, both properties and relations may be caught on as universals that are instantiated by people at a particular point in time. Like properties, relations are either determinable or determinate. Definable relations are not clearly indicated, like the connection of being far off from. Determinate relations are completely indicated, like the connection of being precisely 1 meter removed from. It is conceivable to conceptualize properties and propositions as extraordinary sorts of relations. Agreeing to this, the contrast between these marvels as it were concerns how numerous substances they apply to. Standard relations are polyadic and hence apply to a few substances. Properties are monadic relations and as it were apply to a single substance. Suggestions are relations with a degree of 0 and do not apply to any substances. The inverse point of view is too conceivable, to conceptualize relations as polyadic or social properties. It is more often than not acknowledged that social properties go with relations. If X stands in a connection to Y, then X has the social property of bearing a connection to Y. For case, since Antony was hitched to Cleopatra, he had the social property of being hitched to Cleopatra. In any case, it is not for the most part acknowledged that relations are accurately caught on as or can be decreased to social properties. Historically, properties have gotten altogether more consideration from metaphysicists than relations. Types. Various sorts of relations are recognized in the scholarly writing based on their ontological status, the spaces they apply to, and the structures they form. Internal and external. And powerful refinement separates between inner and outside relations. A connection is inner if it as it were depends on what the relata are like. It is decided by the characteristics or the nature of the relata alone. Outside relations are not settled this way and carry characteristics that go past the natural highlights of their relata. Scientific relations between numbers are illustrations of inner relations. For occurrence, the number 6 stands in the connection of being more noteworthy than to the number 5. This connection is inside since it is fundamental to the numbers 6 and 5 that 6 is more noteworthy than 5. Other conventional cases of inside relations are resemblance and difference. Spatial relations are ordinarily caught on as outside relations, like the connection of a book to the table it is lying on. The same is genuine for worldly and causal relations. G.E. Moore introduced the refinement between inner and outside relations. However, the exact characterization of the qualification between inner and outside relations is debated and there are different contradictory ways to characterize them. Concurring to G.E. Moore, a connection is inside if it takes after from the presence of its relata that the connection moreover exists. This implies that the connection is essential to the relata and it is incomprehensible for the two relata to exist without standing in this connection. For Moore, outside relations are diverse since they might come up short to get indeed if its relata exist. Another definition is protected by logicians like Armstrong, who hold that a connection is inside if it is required by the properties or the inborn highlights of the relata. David K. Lewis provides a somewhat diverse detailing by claiming that inside relations supervene on the inherent properties of their components. A few rationalists conversation of ideal relations to allude to relations that exclusively depend on the qualities of the related terms, and differentiate to real relations, for which this is not the case. The distinction between these definitions influences whether a few relations are characterized as inner or outside. An illustration is the connection of having the same shape. This connection applies if X is a 3D shape and Y is too a 3D shape. Agreeing to Armstrong, this connection is inside since it as it were depends on the natural nature of X and Y. This is not the case for Moore since Y could have been a circle or maybe than a 3D shape, meaning that the connection is outside since it is not required by the presence of X and Y. The contrast between inner and outside relations has different results for the ontological status of relations. Concurring to a common C, inside relations do not frame portion of reality on the most essential level since they supervene on their relata. In this respect, they are as of now included in a few sense in the relata and constitute no expansion to being. That is not the case for outside relations, which are more than the substances they interface and in this way present additional ontological commitments. Discussions around the presence of relations ordinarily center on the address of whether outside relations exist. One trouble in this respect is where to find them since it appears that they are not contained inside the relata whereas they moreover cannot exist without them. Formal and material. Another refinement is between formal and fabric relations, some of the time moreover named lean and thick relations. Formal relations include theoretical thoughts that do not carry any concrete substance. Agreeing to a commonly held C, all formal relations are internal. They are frequently characterized as topic neutral, meaning that they relate to all categories of being. Material relations are related with concrete thoughts. They include particular and considerable substance that are open to perceptual involvement. Illustrations of formal relations are personality, entailment, being more noteworthy than, set enrollment, and likeness. By differentiate, the relations of collision, grinning, adoring, slaughtering, and giving are fabric relations. Logical and causal. The square of opposition shows coherent relations between the four basic categorical propositions in Aristotelian logic. Logical relations are relations between components of thought, particularly between propositions or articulations. Two recommendations are consistently related if the truth value of one depends on the truth esteem of the other. In this respect, it is not vital whether the suggestions are genuine but as it were how the truth esteem of one recommendation would influence the truth esteem of the other. For occasion, the claims, John has a tall IQ and is gigantically prevalent, and John has a tall IQ, are coherently related since the to begin with claim cannot be genuine if the moment claim is false. Logical relations are found through a priori reasoning or maybe then perceptual experience and are considered by logic. They are frequently utilized to illustrate or demonstrate a claim. Of essential intrigue in rationale is the connection of logical consequence or entailment. This connection holds between the premises of an contention and its conclusion if the contention is administered by a valid rule of deduction. It decides what takes after coherently from what and is display if the truth of the premises guarantees the truth of the conclusion. This implies that if the premises are genuine, the conclusion cannot be untrue. Other cases of consistent relations are being contrary and being conflicting. Two articulations are conflicting if it is vital that one is genuine and the other is wrong, like the explanations, the coffee is cold, and the coffee is not cold. Two articulations are contraries if it is not conceivable that both are genuine but it is conceivable that both are untrue, like the articulations, the coffee is cold, and the coffee is hot. Causal relations are cause-effect relations between concrete occasions. This is the case if an prior occasion brings around an afterward occasion. An illustration is a white billiard ball that hits a ruddy billiard ball, which in turn begins rolling toward a corner stash. In this case, there is a causal connection between the collision event and the rolling event. Causal relations are examined by the observational sciences and can be known through perceptual encounter. They play a part in clarifying why something happened. Causal relations are customarily caught on as outside relations. Concurring to this C, they comply outside causal laws or laws of nature that decide how impacts take after from causes and are not settled by the inside nature of the included occasions. They are customarily seen as unexpected. They are the way they are, but they may have been diverse since the causal laws might have been different. An elective position gets at causation not in terms of causal laws but in terms of the powers of objects. In this case, the impact is a sign of the powers of the included objects. Agreeing to this C, causal relations are inner relations if powers are caught on as inherent properties of objects. One trouble in recognizing between causal and coherent relations is that both can be communicated with the term since. For occurrence, the sentence, John came back since he cherished her, communicates a causal connection with cherish being the cause of John's return. The sentence, John cherished her, since he came back, communicates a coherent connection in which the presence of John's cherish is induced from the reality that he came back. Spatial and temporal. Spatial and transient relations structure the physical world and organize how concrete objects and occasions stand to each other. Spatial relations influence where substances are found and how near or far off they are from each other. Cases are being 3 feet from, being underneath, and being inside. Transient relations concern when something happens relative to something else. Cases are occurring before, occurring after, and occurring at the same time. It is ordinarily held that spatio-temporal relations as it were hold between concrete objects but not between unique objects. Spatial and transient relations are ordinarily categorized as outside relations. The ontological status of spatial and worldly relations depends on how space and time are conceived. The hypothesis of relationalism states that spacetime is nothing but the spatial and transient relations in which substances stand to each other. Concurring to this C, spatial and worldly relations are essential and constitute spacetime. A diverse C is substantivalism, which holds that spacetime is a substance that exists freely of the substances that possess it. Both relationalists and substantivalists acknowledge normal articulations approximately spatiotemporal relations, for case that the 2 towers of the brilliant entryway bridge are 4,200 feet separated. Concurring to relationalists, this sentence is genuine since there is a principal spatial connection between the towers themselves. Concurring to substantivalists, this is genuine since the two towers involve two particular and spatially far-off districts in the spacetime substance. In classical material science, space and time are caught on as autonomous measurements that are outright and can be measured and analyzed independently from each other. In modern material science, space and time are seen as forbid measurements that frame a unified continuum whose curvature is influenced by the nearness of mass and energy. By auxiliary features. Binary relations are frequently recognized based on a few formal or basic highlights of how their components are associated to one another. Symmetric relations always come in sets. If X is related to Y, then Y is related to X. And case is the relation being as ancient as, if Tom is as ancient as Zoe at that point, Zoe is as ancient as Tom. Symmetric relations differentiate with non-symmetric relations, for which this pair-like behavior is not continuously watched. An illustration is the love relation. If Dave cherishes Sarah, at that point it is conceivable but not fundamental that Sarah adores Dave. An uncommon case of non-symmetric relations are asymmetric relations, which as it were go one way. An illustration is the relation being heavier than. If Ben is heavier than Nia, at that point it is not conceivable at the same time that Nia is heavier than Ben. Symmetric relations are not touchy to how their components are requested since they go both ways. In any case, the arrange of the components things for non-symmetric relations. An advanced refinement is between transitive and intransitive relations. Transitive relations show a chain-like nature. If X is related to Y and Y is related to Z, then X is related to Z. An illustration is the relation being bigger than. If a truck is bigger than a car and a car is bigger than a bike, at that point a truck is bigger than a bike. A connection is intransitive if this chain-like behavior is not continuously shown. And case is the relation being a parent of. If Tess is a parent of Sway and Sway is a parent of Carol, at that point it is not consequently the case that Tess is a parent of Carol. Another qualification is between reflexive and irreflexive relations. Reflexive relations are those in which each substance is related to itself. An illustration is the relation being as ancient as since each substance is as ancient as itself. Irreflexive relations are relations that never interface in substance to itself. An illustration is the relation being akin of, no one is their possessed sibling. These basic highlights are utilized to characterize assist sorts of relations, like equivalence and strict partial arrange. An proportionality connection is a connection that is reflexive, symmetric, and transitive, like equality expressed through the image equals. A strict partial order is a connection that is irreflexive, antisymmetric, and transitive, like the relation being less than expressed through the image less than sign. Ontological status. Various wrangles about in transcendentalism are concerned with the ontological status of relations. Relations come with certain issues that are not displayed for other ontological categories, like substances and monadic properties. They are diverse from substances since they depend on the substances they interface. They are diverse from properties since they apply to a few substances and cannot be found in any one of their relata. The ontological status of relations is debated and different hypotheses have been proposed. They are regularly separated into realism and anti-realism. Realists hold that relations have mind-independent presence in outside reality, which is denied by anti-realists. However, different middle positions between these Cs can be recognized. Strict anti-realists or eliminativists deny that there are any relations. A marginally weaker position sees relations as mental developments or projections. Another viewpoint is to acknowledge that relations exist whereas with respect to them as non-fundamental substances. This sort of position is taken by reductionists, who claim that relations are eminent substances that can be decreased to other substances. Solid realists progress a more strong C and C relations as portion of the principal ontological stock of reality. The contrast between inner and outside relations is central to their ontological status, and the two sorts are frequently treated separately. The issue of the ontological status of relations is closely associated to the problem of the one and the many. This issue comprises in clarifying how reality can at the same time be both an assortment, since there are numerous unmistakable substances, and a solidarity, since all the particular substances take part in one common reality. Location problem. Many of the troubles related with the ontological status of relations are associated to the area problem. The area issue comprises in the address of where relations are located. For case, the sentence, Glasgow is west of Edinburgh, depicts the area of two cities based on the relation being west of. In any case, it does not indicate where the connection itself is located. Different arrangements to the area issue have been proposed. One recommendation is that the area of relations is divided. According to this C, the connection of being west of resides in both Glasgow and Edinburgh together. A diverse approach is to hold that relations exist in a put between their connection. A advanced hypothesis states that relations are abstract objects that do not have an area in space and time. A closely associated issue concerns the way in which relations depend on their relata. Like properties, relations are customarily conceived as accidents or subordinate substances. For standard properties, this can be combined with the thought that they are found in the protest which bears them and on which they depend. Be that as it may, this arrangement is more troublesome for relations, particularly for outside relations, since they do not inhere in a single substance but frame associations between substances. Their outside area makes it more troublesome to conceive how they can be subordinate substances at the same time. The challenges concerning the area of relations have provoked a few logicians to deny that relations exist or to hold that they exist as it were as thoughts in the mind. Eliminativism. Eliminativists almost relations hold that relations do not exist. They frequently see relations as mental reflections that are not portion of reality at the most principal level. A few eliminativists guard the C for all relations, whereas others center particularly on outside relations. They regularly legitimize their position by the ontological issues related with relations, such as the area issue. Mystical monists, like a few protectors of absolute optimism, regularly dismiss the presence of veritable relations by claiming that there exists as it were one extreme subject of predication. F. H. Bradley formulated a relapse argument to guard the claim that relations do not exist. A well-known contention for eliminativism is called Bradley's relapse. It was defined by F. H. Bradley, who contends that relations do not exist since they include a vicious boundless relapse. Bradley gets at relations as universals and holds that a connection can as it were interface two substances if it is related to them. He claims that in a range to be related to them, a moment connection is required to relate the to begin with connection to its relata. Be that as it may, the same issue is rehashed on the level of the moment connection, which requires a third connection, and so on. This leads to a horrendous boundless relapse since the same issue emerges for all extra relations. Bradley concludes from the coming about conundrum that relations do not exist. The conclusion of Bradley's relapse is not for the most part acknowledged, and different contentions have been defined to dismiss it. One approach is to recognize between relations as universals and social actualities comparing to specific occasions. Concurring to this C, the association between a connection and its relata is made by the truth that instantiates the connection without the require for a moment connection. A closely associated clarification gets at relations not as universals but as specific substances, so-called tropes. Rivals of these approaches have contended that they come up short to really unravel the issue since they do not clarify how actualities or tropes interface a connection to its relata without requiring a moment connection. Another contention against Bradley's relapse rejects the starting suspicion that relations require to be related to the relata. Objections to eliminativism in common are regularly based on the thought that relations are required to portray reality. For occasion, relations appear to be an indispensable part of arithmetic and the experimental sciences. Reductionism. Reductionism is the see that relations can eventually be diminished to or clarified in terms of non-relational substances. In this respect, they are not a considerable expansion to reality but as it were go with other wonders. A few scholars get at reductionism as a shape of anti-realism, whereas others hold that reductionism permits that relations exist in a powerless sense but denies that they are portion of the most principal level of reality. A common frame of reductionism states that relations can be caught on in terms of the monadic properties of the related entities. For illustration, the mountain Ben Vorlich stands in the connection of being taller than to its neighbor Ben Vane. This is clarified by the properties of the two mountains. Ben Vorlich is 3,094 feet tall, whereas Ben Vane is 3,002 feet tall. Agreeing to this see, no extra social actualities other than these properties are required. Another case is the connection of likeness, which is regularly analyzed in terms of shared properties. The claim that all relations, counting outside relations, can be decreased to monadic properties is disputable. For occurrence, it is not clear how spatial relations can be analyzed this way. An advanced contention against reductionism comes from cutting-edge material science and holds that the non-relational properties it examines are not adequate to clarify all phenomena. Reductionism is common when connected to inside relations, but it is not generally acknowledged. One anti-reductionist contention holds that a few kind of negligible formal connection between the monadic properties themselves is required indeed in the case of inside relations. For illustration, to clarify that Ben Vorlich is higher than Ben Vane, the properties being 3,094 feet high and being 3,002 feet high by themselves are not adequate if one does not accept that the connection of being more noteworthy than holds between these properties. Realism. Realists hold that relations are portion of reality. This see is ordinarily combined with the claim that relations have mind-independent presence. In a solid shape, it states that relations have a place to the most principal level of reality. However, there are two weaker shapes of authenticity. They hold that relations are genuine but do not exist on the most essential level. Agreeing to this see, they rise from non-relational highlights and are in this sense, no expansion to being. Some realists get at relations as universals. Agreeing to this see, relations are repeatable and can be instantiated by distinctive bunches of individuals. A distinctive see holds that relations are tropes or non-repeatable particulars. Relationalism. Relationalism is a solid shape of authenticity, almost relations. In its most extensive sense, it states that all of reality is social at its most crucial level and denies the presence of non-relational properties. The terms relationism and social cosmology are in some cases utilized as equivalent words. Relationalism contrasts with substantivalism, moreover known as substantivism, which sees substances, and not relations, as the crucial constituents of reality. One center instinct propelling relationalism is that a key to understanding any question is to get a handle on how it is related to other objects. Some relationalists state that objects do not exist at all, whereas others hold that they as it were exist as subordinate entities. For case, the position of ontic structuralism claims that objects are structures made up of relations. According to rationalist Randall Dippert, the world is made up of relations that shape the structure of a mathematical graph, and the concrete substances in it are subgraphs. Relationalism is a questionable see when caught on in its most grounded frame as a hypothesis of reality in common. Other than its clash with common sense, one trouble is that relations are as a rule caught on as subordinate substances that apply to the objects they interface, or maybe then as free substances that might exist without their relata. Another trouble is that simply social structures appear to be theoretical objects that cannot by themselves account for the concrete reality they point to describe. Some relationalists guard more confined speculations by constraining their claims to particular spaces, or maybe then attempting to clarify reality as a whole. In the logic of space and time, relationalism is the see that spacetime is not a substance, as substantivalists claim, but a organize of spatio-temporal relations between person-physical phenomena. In the philosophy of recognition, relationalism almost color is the see that colors are not normal monadic properties of objects but relations between perceptual circumstances and the subjects that see them. In the philosophy of human science, relationalism is an approach that explores wide social wonders by considering the relations between interactants. Illustrations are seeing society as the totality of intuitive between individuals or understanding the world of art in terms of the relations between specialists, makers, gatherings of people, and critics. History. The nature of relations was reconceptualized taking after different scholastic advancements in the 19th century, such as the definition of the rationale of relations by Augustus de Morgan. The history of the philosophy of relations can generally be partitioned into two periods. Customarily up until the late 19th century, metaphysicists were suspicious approximately the nature of relations. They ordinarily respected them as lower substances that do not play a part on the essential level of reality. This viewpoint changed in the 19th century, when different advancements in the areas of science, rationale, and science incited logicians to reconceptualize the nature of relations and the require of relations to depict reality on its most fundamental level. Aristotle's qualification between substances and mishaps was powerful in how relations were conceived by afterward philosophers. Substances are the essential constituents of reality. They exist in themselves and are not predicable of something else, like an person, man, or a horse. Mischances cannot exist without a substance. They are conceivable but non-necessary adjustments of substances, like being in a sitting position. Aristotle conceived relations as the least shape of mischances that depend not fair on substances but moreover on other mischances. Numerous ensuing rationalists acknowledged the thought that relations are non-substantial substances that are incapable to exist on their claim and depend on other substances. For illustration, the Neoplatonists Plotinus and Porphyry followed Aristotle in seeing relations as mischances, whereas emphasizing at the same time that relations are genuine entities. The nature and part of relations were examined in detail in medieval reasoning, particularly by scholastic philosophers. They concurred with Aristotle that relations are mishaps. A common approach was to decrease relations to sets of monadic properties. This approach was exemplified by Peter Abelard and William Ockham, who clarified relations in terms of non-relational qualities had by the relata. For occasion, they held that if Socrates is comparative to Theaetetus at that point, this is since they share certain qualities, like color. A few academic logicians, like Peter Auriol, rejected relations and held instead that they are just mental affiliations of substances not found exterior the mind. A distinctive approach was taken after by Albert the Great and John Duns Scotus, who caught on relations as an unmistakable and irreducible sort of entity. Thomas Aquinas defended a center position by holding that a few relations have a considerable establishment in reality, like being a father, whereas others simply exist on the verbal level, like being moved being. The see that relations are reducible to other substances or exist only in the intellect was especially common in the advanced period. Thomas Hobbes defended a frame of nominalism according to which as it were people exist. This suggests that relations need appropriate ontological status and as it were exist in the intellect as a shape of mental comparison. Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz held that relations do not have crucial reality and depicted the world instead as a collection of unconnected monads. Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz rejected the crucial reality of relations based on the claim that they would need a legitimate area in this case. These ontological troubles provoked Leibniz to propose his monadology, concurring to which reality is made up of austere and unconnected monads. For him, relations are eminent substances that emerge from the inherent properties of the relata. They are caught on as sets of monadic properties and not as ontologically unmistakable substances. For occurrence, if Adam is the father of Cain, at that point Adam has the property of being a father of Cain and Cain has the property of being a child of Adam. In this respect, relations have an establishment in reality but are at the same time mental developments that emerge by comparing things. Leibniz's idealist outlook on relations influenced Immanuel Kant, who included relation in his system of categories as one of the four fundamental bunches of categories. It covers the theme of how human minds organize and get at objects and concepts in terms of their shared associations, conditions, and intuitive, for case, how properties inhere in substances and how impacts depend on their causes. Kant gave an unmistakable part to relations and held that amazing reality is at its center constituted by relations. This optimist viewpoint on the significance of relations was too guarded by Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, who contended that the nature, meaning, and esteem of things emerges from how they take part in relations. Charles Sanders Peirce compared relations to particles shaped by bonds between elements. Difficulties around the ontological status of relations were moreover reflected in how they were treated in the field of logic before present-day formal rationale. For example, Aristotelian logic restricts itself to recommendations in a subject-predicate shape in which the predicate expresses qualities or qualities of a single substance in the subject position. Modern rationale, by differentiate, too permits thinking with relations to express how a few substances stand to each other. An vital early advancement in this respect was the definition of the rationale of relations by Augustus de Morgan in the 19th century. It presents formal gadgets to evaluate the legitimacy of thinking in respect to relations, counting compound relations like combining the relations of father of and brother of into uncle of. De Morgan's rationale of relations was a cyst created by Charles Sanders Peirce, who conceptualized the adicity of relations in relationship to chemical components that frame atoms based on their valency. The issue of relations played a central part in Bradley's logic. He protected a shape of monist optimism. Agreeing to it, there are no genuine isolated substances, and as it were, one substance exists in the shape of an thought or encounter. For Bradley, the majority of things in the world, as it shows up to us, is eventually in figment. A result of this is that there are no veritable relations since there are no particular substances that may be related to each other. He contended for this conclusion by attempting to appear that relations cannot exist since they would include a vicious infinite regress. Bertrand Russell argued that outside relations exist since they are required to grant an exact logical depiction of the outside world. Various early analytic logicians, like Moore and Bertrand Russell, rejected Bradley's monist optimism and the related hypothesis of relations. Moore based his dismissal of Bradley's tenet on the claim that it is not in tune with common sense, which favors a pluralistic metaphysics with veritable relations. Moore was advanced compelling in creating the qualification between inside and outside relations. Russell contended in favor of the reality of outside relations by indicating out that they are required to provide an precise logical portrayal of the outside world. Arguments for the reality of relations based on science were too guarded by David Mallet Armstrong. He conceived relations as universals that are instantiated in spacetime. Agreeing to him, it is the part of science to decide which social universals exist. Various other arrangements to the issue of relations have been proposed. For example, Gottlob Frege understood them as deficient objects with open positions. They are completed when these positions are filled by the relata. In this respect, relations do not happen on their possess and exist as it were insofar as they build up associations between other substances. An advanced approach is found in Ludwig Wittgenstein's early logic, where he expressed that objects can frame associations with each other without requiring any extra components. In this way, they are comparative to chains. The diverse joins of the chain are straightforwardly associated to each other without the extra required for social substances to build up the connection.